All right, you guys, so we are going to be starting off with lesson 5.1. This is the Parabola's intro. So it is going to be a two-part lesson. We are going to be focused on this first portion here, and then we'll move on to the other section. But in this case, guys, Parabola intro lesson 5.1 talks about students can identify special characteristics of quadratic functions. A few of our vocab terms here is parabola, vertex, axis of symmetry, x-intercept, and y-intercept. So we are entering a new chapter, guys. It is focusing on quadratic functions now, which is graphing quadratics, basically. So quadratics in this case we saw in the previous chapter, but now we're going to go ahead and focus on talking about parabolas. Now, in this case, guys, I actually want you guys to pause the video here. I want you guys to actually sketch this out, because this is actually going to be most of what we're going to be seeing in the lesson. So go ahead and sketch this out. So yeah, go ahead and sketch it out, guys. Pause the video, and then once you're done, just come back to it. But in this case, guys, whenever we're talking about parabolas here, parabolas is basically this U-shaped graph that you see here. Parabolas do have a U shape. So once again, this is a parabola, that's a parabola. This here is also a parabola. So parabolas in this case, I just do want to go ahead and emphasize, are U-shaped graphs. U-shaped. So they do have a U shape. And in this case, guys, when you're looking at a parabola, the parabola is either going to be opening upward or that it's going to be opening downward. And that's just based on whether the direction the parabola is opening here. So for example, if I take a look at this green graph here, and the parabola is actually facing up, so I can consider this parabola here an upward parabola. This is actually going to be open upward. Open upward. So that's the first one. I could actually also, looking at the purple one, I will be consider this one as well open upward, because once again this is just regular U shape. If it's upside down U, then this parabola here, for example, is an upside down U. So we would consider this open downward. Open downward. Let me write it more up here. Open downward. All right, so that's that parabola there, opening up downward. All right, so you open upward, you open downward. There's only two ways, open upward or downward. So our next step, guys, is to actually talk about the vertex. Now, in this case, guys, the vertex is actually the maximum or the minimum point of the parabola. Vertex actually represents the highest or the lowest point in our parabola. Now, looking at our parabolas in this case, guys, we have to identify either the highest or the lowest point. If you have a parabola that's opening upward, you will be having the lowest point. So if I go through my graph here and I keep on going and see where my lowest point is, my lowest point is actually down here. So vertex in this case for this first one, I'll do it in green, is found here. Now, if I actually want to go ahead and identify that point, it's actually between 3 and 4, and also -3 and -4. So in this case, my vertex, because this here represents the vertex, is going to be the point 3.5, because that's the number in between 3 and 4. And this is -3.5, because that's representing the y value, which in this case on the bottom is negative. So that is my vertex there. If I move on to the other ones, for example, the one in purple, I also have a vertex here, which in this case would actually be a minimum. I forgot to label that on this one here. this vertex here is a minimum. I'll just put min because it's the lowest point. Once again, if I take a look there, that would actually be -1 and some other point there. So I'm not actually going to label my vertex there. I'm just going to write vertex, and that will be considered a minimum, a min. All right. Now, both of these, once again, parabola is facing upward, which means you have a minimum. If the parabola is open downward, on the other hand, we're not going to be having a minimum. We actually have a maximum. So vertex here will be a maximum. Vertex there will be a maximum. All right, so let me just do some highlighting here. Vertex, I'll go ahead and highlight it in blue. So these here represent my vertex. Once again, I did label just one of my vertexes there. Parabola is opening upward, to highlight that in yellow, and opening downward. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next one. Now, once again, we have vertex. Vertex is either the highest point or the lowest point in the graph. If you have a downward parabola, you have a maximum. If you have an upward parabola, you have a minimum.